Freya Grant had always been an anomaly, even among her peers in the highly specialized field of alien research. From a young age, she had an insatiable curiosity, one that led her to explore uncharted territories of science. However, it wasn't the stars that first caught her interest, but the concept of life beyond them. Growing up in a world where the existence of extraterrestrial beings was both a source of fascination and fear, Freya became one of the few brave enough to turn that curiosity into a career. After years of rigorous education and training, Freya landed a prestigious position with the Earth Defense and Exploration Division, EEED, a government-run organization dedicated to studying alien life forms. For years, she worked tirelessly in her research, analyzing alien remains, deciphering their complex language, and working through endless piles of data. But her work was always limited to the remnants of alien life: skeletal structures, tissue samples, and artifacts found on exploratory missions. Freya's fascination grew over time as she started feeling something more profound and personal towards the aliens she studied. Though she had never encountered a living alien, she began to sense that their existence was more than scientific. It was spiritual, a connection between species that transcended her knowledge. This emotional attachment, however, led her to a crossroads. It wasn't just about the research anymore. It was about understanding these beings on a deeper level, a level that both intrigued and scared her. Her peers and superiors grew concerned, as her dedication was blurring the lines between professional curiosity and an emotional obsession. When Freya caught herself talking to the alien specimens as though they could hear her, she knew something was wrong. Realizing she needed a break to reassess her feelings and approach, Freya voluntarily retired from her position at EDED. She left without much explanation, her departure shocking her colleagues, who thought her to be one of the most dedicated scientists they had ever worked with. The next 5 years were a period of personal reckoning. Freya attempted to distance herself from the world of alien research, but it proved to be a futile endeavor. She tried to lead a normal life, taking on a variety of mundane jobs and hobbies, yet her mind always wandered back to the creatures she once studied. She filled her home with books on space exploration, alien theories, and hypothetical scenarios about the existence of extraterrestrial life. Freya's fascination with aliens turned into a quiet obsession, one she attempted to suppress, but it consumed her thoughts at every turn. She dreamt of them often, waking in the middle of the night with a strange sense of longing for the unknown. Her isolation grew, as few people could understand her unusual interests, and she felt out of place in ordinary social circles. Freya would often imagine the aliens she once studied were reaching out to her, calling her back to her research. It was a battle between her rational mind and her inexplicable connection to beings she had never truly met. One day, after years of wrestling with her inner conflict, Freya reached a breaking point. A vivid dream shattered her attempts to suppress her curiosity. In it, she stood before an alien, living, breathing, sentient. They exchanged no words, but the connection between them felt real, more real than anything she had ever experienced in her waking life. The alien's eyes seemed to communicate a plea, a sense of urgency, as if it needed her help. When Freya awoke, she knew that her departure from EDED had been premature. She realized she couldn't run from her calling any longer. Returning to EDED was no easy task. Though her departure had been voluntary, she had left behind a position of prestige, and returning after 5 years would undoubtedly raise questions. Nonetheless, Freya was determined. She spent weeks gathering the courage to draft a formal request for reinstatement, detailing how her time away had provided her with new insights and a renewed passion for alien research. Her colleagues were initially skeptical of her return, but they couldn't deny her talent and expertise in the field. After several rounds of meetings and psychological evaluations, which Freya passed despite her private reservations, she was reinstated to her former role. Freya's return to the lab was both familiar and surreal. The cold, sterile walls of the research facility welcomed her back as if she had never left. The smell of disinfectants and the hum of the high-tech equipment were strangely comforting, like returning home after a long journey. But this time, something was different. Freya noticed a new intensity in her colleagues' work. Rumors had spread about a recent breakthrough, not just the discovery of new alien artifacts, but the presence of something far more important. Freya's heart raced as she prepared to re-enter the field she once dominated. The night before her first official day back, she stayed awake, her mind racing with possibilities. Had they finally captured a living alien? The thought both terrified and excited her. For years, she had worked with nothing more than alien remnants, trying to piece together the mystery of their existence. But now, if the rumors were true, everything was about to change. Freya's suspicions were confirmed almost immediately upon her return to the lab. In hushed whispers, she learned that a living alien had been captured, the first in human history. As she was briefed on the situation, the gravity of the moment hit her. The alien, she was told, had been kept in isolation for weeks, with little progress made in communicating with it. Some researchers viewed it as a dangerous entity, while others saw it as an unprecedented opportunity for peaceful contact. Freya was somewhere in between, caught between her scientific duty and her personal fascination. Her first meeting with the alien was a turning point. The creature was unlike anything she had imagined. Taller than a human, with elongated limbs and a shimmering, iridescent skin that reflected the light in strange, mesmerizing patterns. Its eyes, deep and knowing, seemed to pierce through her, as though it could see into the very depths of her soul. But what struck her the most was the alien's expression, not one of fear or aggression, but of quiet pleading, as though it was waiting for someone to understand it. Freya stood frozen in front of the containment unit, her breath shallow as she took in the sight of the living alien. It was as if her entire career, her very life, had been leading up to this moment. But what was she supposed to do now? Part of her wanted to run, overwhelmed by the enormity of the situation. But another part, the part that had never stopped dreaming of this moment, urged her to step forward. As she approached, the alien shifted, its eyes locking onto hers. In a voice that was barely more than a whisper, Freya heard the words, "Help me." It was the first time in history that an alien had spoken, and it had spoken to her. The research lab buzzed with nervous energy the day Freya Grant was summoned to the containment room. Word had spread fast. The alien had been trying to communicate with them. However, no one had been able to decipher its language or understand its gestures. The tension in the facility was palpable, with some of the scientists pushing for further isolation and others advocating for a deeper attempt at contact. Freya, newly returned and still finding her footing, couldn't help but feel both honored and terrified when she was called in to assist. As she walked through the narrow, sterile hallways of the research facility, Freya's heart raced. Despite her years of studying alien specimens, she had never interacted with a living extraterrestrial. The idea of a living, sentient being, vastly different from anything humanity had ever encountered, was overwhelming. Her mind raced with questions. What did it want? Was it dangerous? Could they truly communicate? Yet, underlying her nervousness was an undeniable sense of wonder. Freya had spent years studying aliens from a distance, dreaming of the day she might encounter one. Now, it was happening. Freya paused in front of the door to the containment unit, a sleek, high-tech chamber with thick glass walls and multiple security measures in place. She was briefed one final time by her superior, Dr. Isaac Benson, a stern man with graying hair who had been leading the alien research project since its inception. "Remember, Freya," he said in his gravelly voice, "this is uncharted territory. We don't know the full extent of its abilities. Proceed with caution." Freya nodded, trying to calm the storm of emotions swirling inside her. Benson gave her a final, searching look before swiping his access card and allowing the doors to hiss open. The containment room was large and circular, with dim lighting that cast eerie shadows on the walls. In the center of the room stood a transparent enclosure, and inside it, the alien. Freya's breath caught in her throat the moment she laid eyes on it. The creature was even more magnificent than she had imagined. Its skin shimmered with an iridescent glow, constantly shifting between shades of blue, green, and violet, like the surface of an otherworldly ocean. Its eyes, large and almond-shaped, glowed faintly with a soft, silver light. The alien was taller than a human, with slender limbs and an elongated torso, its form both graceful and intimidating. For a moment, Freya stood frozen, unable to tear her gaze away. The alien was sitting on the floor of the enclosure, its arms resting limply in front of it, bound by metallic restraints that glowed with a faint, humming energy. It looked tired, defeated even, and yet there was a sharp intelligence in its gaze. As if sensing her presence, the alien slowly lifted its head, its eyes locking onto hers. The air seemed to grow thicker, charged with an invisible energy. Freya felt her pulse quicken, and the rest of the world seemed to fall away as she focused solely on the being in front of her. There was no mistaking it. The alien was aware of her, fully conscious of its surroundings. It wasn't just a specimen. It was a person, a sentient being, and for reasons she couldn't yet understand, it had chosen to communicate with her. Freya stepped closer to the enclosure, her eyes never leaving the alien's. She could feel a strange connection between them, something beyond words, as though the alien was reaching out to her on a level she couldn't fully comprehend. Her hand hovered above the control panel that would allow her to speak to it through the glass. "Freya, can you hear me?" Dr. Benson's voice crackled over the earpiece, pulling her momentarily back to reality. "Yes," she responded, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions inside her. "I'm approaching the subject now." "Be cautious. We still don't know how it communicates. Don't let your guard down." Freya nodded absent-mindedly, her focus entirely on the alien. She pressed the intercom button on the control panel, activating the two-way communication system. "Can you understand me?" Freya asked, her voice soft yet clear. For a moment, there was silence. The alien's gaze remained fixed on her, unblinking, as though it were studying her just as much as she was studying it. Then, to her shock, the alien spoke, not in its own language, but in hers. "Help me," it whispered, its voice resonating through the speakers in a low, melodic tone. The sound sent a shiver down Freya's spine. Freya's mind reeled. The alien had spoken English, albeit haltingly, but the words were unmistakable. This was a breakthrough beyond anything she could have anticipated. It was not just sentient. It was capable of learning and understanding human language. "Help you?" Freya repeated, her voice trembling slightly. "How?" The alien shifted in its restraints, the metallic bonds around its wrists glowing faintly. It glanced down at its bound hands and then back up at Freya. "Release me," it said, its voice more urgent now. "I must return to my planet." Freya hesitated, her hand still hovering above the control panel. Every protocol in the book warned against making such a decision. The alien was unknown, potentially dangerous, and releasing it could have catastrophic consequences. But as she stood there, looking into its pleading eyes, Freya couldn't shake the feeling that she was witnessing something extraordinary. She had always believed that aliens were more than just distant creatures to be studied and dissected. They were intelligent beings with thoughts, feelings, and perhaps even emotions. "Freya, what's happening?" Dr. Benson's voice cut through the moment. "What's it saying?" Freya hesitated before responding. "It's asking for help. It wants me to release it." "Absolutely not," Benson barked. "That creature is a potential threat. We can't risk—" "Dr. Benson," Freya interrupted, her voice firm. "This is a unique opportunity. If it trusts me, we could learn more about its species. We need to establish a relationship, not treat it like a prisoner." There was a tense silence on the other end of the line. Freya knew Benson was weighing his options. After a moment, his voice came back, begrudging but authoritative. "You're making a mistake, Freya. Do not release it. That's an order." Freya's hand hovered over the release mechanism, her mind racing. She knew the risks. She knew what disobeying Benson could cost her. But in that moment, her instincts told her that helping the alien was the right thing to do. It wasn't just about the research anymore. It was about something deeper, something she couldn't fully explain. Freya's heart pounded in her chest as she made her decision. In one swift motion, she deactivated the restraints. The metallic bonds around the alien's wrists and ankles flickered and then vanished, releasing it from its confinement. The alien stood up slowly, stretching its long limbs as though savoring its newfound freedom. For a brief moment, Freya wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. But the alien didn't attack or flee. Instead, it turned to her, its eyes filled with something that resembled gratitude. "Thank you," it said softly, its voice filled with emotion. Before Freya could respond, the alien raised one of its slender hands and made a strange, intricate gesture in the air. A faint light began to glow around its body, shimmering like the surface of a lake at dawn. Freya watched in awe as the alien's form began to fade, dissolving into particles of light. Then, with a final soft hum, the alien vanished, teleported back to its home planet, just as it had said. Freya stood frozen, staring at the empty space where the alien had been. The room was silent, save for the faint hum of the facility's equipment. Her mind was spinning, trying to process what had just happened. She had made contact with a living alien, and freed it. As the adrenaline faded, a new emotion washed over her. Fear. What had she done? Would she be held responsible for releasing a potential threat? And more importantly, had she just lost humanity's only chance to truly study a living extraterrestrial? Freya didn't have time to dwell on these questions. A week later, the alien would return, setting in motion events she could never have predicted. Freya had never imagined that she would find herself standing on the surface of an alien world. And yet, here she was. The moment she accepted the alien's invitation and was teleported to his home planet, everything she knew about life and the universe shifted. Her surroundings were unlike anything she had ever experienced. The planet was beautiful, almost too beautiful to be real, with its vast landscapes bathed in shimmering colors, plants that glowed softly in the dim light, and skies painted with multiple suns, casting hues of lavender and gold across the horizon. Freya had barely adjusted to the shock of teleportation when she was greeted by a group of aliens, similar in appearance to the one she had freed. They stood tall and graceful, their skin glowing faintly in the twilight. Each one of them studied her with a mix of curiosity and cautious excitement. It was clear that Freya's arrival was an important event, though she still didn't fully understand why. The alien who had brought her here, whom Freya had begun to think of as her guide, stood beside her, his gaze fixed on the others. There was an unspoken tension in the air, a silent exchange between them. Freya felt both welcomed and on edge, unsure of her place in this strange new world. Her guide turned to her, his expression unreadable, and spoke in the same gentle tone he had used back on Earth. "Freya, you are safe here. You are honored among my people." His words were meant to reassure her, but Freya couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that crept over her. She had spent years studying alien behavior, and something about the way the others looked at her felt off. Their smiles were too perfect, too eager, as if they were hiding something beneath the surface. Freya was led through the alien city, a sprawling metropolis of strange, organic structures that seemed to grow from the ground itself. The buildings, if they could be called that, were made of materials she couldn't identify, with walls that pulsed with a faint, rhythmic energy. The streets were lined with plants and creatures she had never seen before, some of which floated through the air, while others slithered across the ground with graceful precision. The city seemed alive, breathing in sync with the planet itself. As they walked, Freya's guide explained the basics of their society. His people, known as the Zorak, were a peaceful race, he assured her. They valued knowledge and harmony above all else, and their technology was far beyond anything humans had ever dreamed of. Freya was amazed by what she saw. Their advancements in medicine, transportation, and communication were astounding, far surpassing anything on Earth. Despite the wonders around her, Freya couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The Zorak were too perfect, too controlled. Every interaction she witnessed felt rehearsed, like everyone was playing a role in a grand performance. She couldn't put her finger on it, but there was a subtle tension that ran beneath the surface, as if something was being carefully hidden from her. Freya's guide brought her to what appeared to be a grand council hall, where she was introduced to the Zorak leaders, an elite group of tall, regal aliens who regarded her with a mixture of awe and scrutiny. They welcomed her warmly, expressing their gratitude for her kindness in freeing their fellow Zorak. They spoke of unity between their two worlds, of forging a bond that would bring their species closer together. One leader, an elder alien with deep silver eyes, stepped forward and spoke in a voice that carried both wisdom and authority. "Freya Grant, you have done a great service to our people. Your compassion is rare, even among your own kind. You are welcome to stay with us for as long as you desire. We will teach you, and you will teach us." Freya nodded, feeling the weight of their words. On the surface, everything seemed perfect. They were offering her a chance to learn from them, to live among them, and gain knowledge beyond her wildest dreams. But deep down, Freya couldn't ignore the gnawing sense that she was being manipulated. The Zorak leaders spoke in a way that was too smooth, too polished, as if they were hiding their true intentions behind a veneer of kindness. As the days passed, Freya found herself immersed in the daily life of the Zorak. She was given a comfortable living space, complete with every luxury she could imagine. Her guide, who now spent most of his time with her, showed her around the planet, introducing her to their customs, their art, and their way of life. Freya marveled at the beauty and elegance of everything she encountered. The Zorak lived in harmony with their environment, and their technology was seamlessly integrated with nature. It was a utopia, the kind of society humanity had only ever dreamed of. But the more time Freya spent on the planet, the more she began to notice the cracks in the facade. There were moments when she caught glimpses of fear in the eyes of some of the Zorak, especially when they thought she wasn't looking. She overheard whispered conversations that stopped abruptly when she entered the room, and there was one Zorak in particular, a younger alien with pale, shimmering skin who always seemed to be watching her from a distance, his expression one of quiet concern. One day, while Freya was exploring the outskirts of the city, the young alien approached her. His movements were cautious, as if he was afraid of being seen with her. Freya immediately recognized him as the one who had been watching her for days. "You shouldn't be here," he whispered urgently, glancing over his shoulder to make sure they were alone. Freya frowned, her heart pounding. "What do you mean? Why are you following me?" The young alien hesitated, as if weighing his next words carefully. "You don't understand. They're not what they seem." Freya's unease deepened. "Who?" "The Zorak." He nodded, his silver eyes filled with an emotion she hadn't seen in any of the other aliens. Fear. "They're using you, Freya. They need you for something terrible." Freya's blood ran cold. She had suspected that something was wrong, but hearing it confirmed by one of their own was even more unsettling. She stepped closer to the young alien, lowering her voice. "What are you talking about? What do they want from me?" The young alien swallowed nervously, his gaze darting around the empty street. "It's not safe to talk here. Meet me tonight, outside the city. I'll explain everything." Before Freya could ask any more questions, the young alien disappeared into the shadows, leaving her standing alone in the quiet, glowing street. Freya's heart raced as she processed what had just happened. If what the young alien said was true, then everything she had been told by the Zorak leaders was a lie. But what were they hiding? And why had they brought her here in the first place? That night, Freya slipped away from the city, her thoughts racing as she made her way to the meeting spot the young alien had mentioned. The landscape outside the city was even more surreal than the city itself, with towering alien flora and glowing pools of liquid that shimmered in the starlight. As she walked, Freya couldn't help but feel a growing sense of dread. The Zorak had been nothing but kind to her, but now she was starting to question everything she had experienced since arriving on the planet. When she arrived at the meeting spot, the young alien was waiting for her, his expression grim. "You came," he said, his voice low and urgent. "Good. There's not much time." Freya crossed her arms, her tone sharp. "Start talking. What's really going on here?" The young alien glanced around, making sure they were alone. "The Zorak leaders, they didn't bring you here out of gratitude. They brought you here because they need something from you. They've been planning this for a long time." Freya's heart sank. "What do they need?" The young alien hesitated, his eyes filled with regret. "They need a child, a hybrid, part human, part Zorak. They believe that a child born from your DNA will possess unique abilities that will allow them to gather information about Earth. They want to use your child as a weapon." Freya felt a wave of nausea wash over her. "A weapon? Against Earth?" The young alien nodded. "They want to use the child to gather intelligence, to find weaknesses in your world's defenses, and once they have that information, they plan to invade." Freya's mind reeled. Everything she had experienced since arriving on the planet now made sense. Their kindness, their hospitality, their eagerness to forge a bond with her. It had all been a ruse, a carefully constructed plan to manipulate her into giving them what they wanted. Freya stared at the young alien, her voice trembling. "Why are you telling me this? Why should I believe you?" The young alien met her gaze, his expression filled with sincerity. "Because I don't want to see you hurt. I don't agree with their plan. I know it's wrong. But if you don't leave now, they'll force you to go through with it." Freya's mind raced as she tried to process everything. She had been so mesmerized by the beauty of the Zorak world that she hadn't seen the truth beneath the surface. Now she knew that she was nothing more than a pawn in their grand scheme, a tool to be used and discarded once they got what they wanted. But Freya wasn't about to let that happen. Freya's heart pounded in her chest as she stood at the precipice of a decision that could shape the fate of two worlds. Everything the young Zorak alien had told her replayed in her mind about their true intentions, the hybrid child they planned to create, and their ultimate goal of conquering Earth. It all made sense now. The kindness she'd been shown, the promises of peace and unity, had been nothing more than a trap. She had been naive, blinded by the beauty of their world and the warmth of their people. But now, with the truth laid bare, Freya knew she had to act. The Zorak couldn't be trusted. She couldn't let them manipulate her into becoming a mother to a child that would be used as a weapon against her own kind. But what choice did she have? The Zorak had already made it clear that her refusal would not be an option. She had seen their power firsthand. Their technology was far more advanced than anything on Earth. Resistance seemed impossible. In the days following her conversation with the young Zorak, Freya's suspicions grew. The once welcoming attitude of the Zorak leaders had taken on a more controlling tone. Their eyes lingered on her in a way that felt more possessive than respectful. She was no longer a guest, but a prisoner in a gilded cage. Every action she took was watched, every conversation subtly monitored. The alien who had brought her to the planet, the one she had once trusted, became distant. His once kind eyes were now cold, and when he spoke to her, it was with a chilling detachment. Freya knew that he had been in on the plan all along. He had been the one to lure her here, the one to make her feel safe and valued, only to deliver her into the hands of the Zorak leaders. The betrayal stung more than anything else. One evening, as Freya sat alone in her quarters, she heard a soft knock at the door. It was the young Zorak, who had warned her of the leader's plan. His face was pale, and his usual calm demeanor was replaced with urgency. "They're coming for you tonight," he whispered, his eyes darting nervously toward the hallway. "They're going to force you to begin the process." Freya felt a wave of fear and anger wash over her. "I'm not going through with this. I won't let them use me." The young alien shook his head, his voice filled with desperation. "You don't understand. You can't fight them. They'll use their technology to force compliance, but there might still be a way to escape." Freya's heart raced. Escape? How? She had seen their teleportation technology, their advanced surveillance systems. Leaving this planet seemed impossible. The young alien reached into his cloak and pulled out a small, glowing device. It looked similar to the teleportation tool her captor had used to bring her here, but more compact and less refined. "This is an old model," he explained quickly. "It's not as precise as the current technology, but it might be your only chance. You can use it to return to Earth." Freya's eyes widened. "You mean I can leave?" The young alien nodded. "But you have to be careful. The moment you activate it, they'll know. You'll have only seconds before they come for you. If you're not quick, they'll catch you." Freya hesitated. If she returned to Earth, what then? The Zorak had already set their plans in motion. They wouldn't stop just because she wasn't here. And if she fled, they would likely retaliate, perhaps even accelerate their plans for invasion. "What happens to you if I leave?" Freya asked, her voice soft. The young alien looked away, his expression pained. It doesn't matter. Just go. Save yourself. Save your world. That night, Freya made her decision. She couldn't let the Zorak enslave her body or use her to birth the weapon they desired. She would not be their pawn. As the hours crept by and the shadows lengthened outside her window, Freya readied herself. The teleportation device felt heavy in her hand, its glow pulsing like a heartbeat. Her heart raced as she activated the device. A familiar hum filled the air, and the space around her began to distort. But before the teleportation could complete, the door to her quarters burst open. Zorak guards stormed in, their eyes glowing with an eerie intensity. They had come to take her by force. But Freya was quicker. With a final burst of energy, the teleportation device whisked her away, leaving the Zorak guards grasping at empty air. Freya's return to Earth was disorienting. The familiar sights, sounds, and smells of her home planet felt distant, as if she had been gone for years rather than mere weeks. But there was no time to reflect. The Zorak would not be far behind. She had seen their technology, and she knew they could track her if they wanted to. The only question was how long she had before they made their next move. In the weeks that followed, Freya tried to warn the world. She reached out to government officials, scientists, and anyone who would listen. But no one believed her. Her stories of advanced alien civilizations and impending invasion were met with skepticism, mockery, or outright dismissal. Desperate, Freya began preparing for the worst. She knew the Zorak would come for Earth, and she knew they wouldn't wait much longer. Their plan was already in motion. They would find another way to carry it out, whether through force or manipulation. It wasn't long before the invasion began. The skies over Earth darkened as the Zorak ships descended from the stars. They came in waves, their sleek alien vessels casting ominous shadows over the cities below. Panic spread like wildfire as people realized that the stories Freya had told were true. The Zorak had arrived, and they were not here to negotiate. The invasion was swift and brutal. The Zorak's advanced technology made them nearly unstoppable. They targeted military bases, communication centers, and key infrastructure, crippling humanity's ability to mount a defense. Within days, the world's major powers had fallen, leaving only pockets of resistance scattered across the globe. Freya watched in horror as the world she had once known crumbled before her eyes. But even in the midst of destruction, she refused to give up. She had been betrayed, manipulated, and hunted. But she was still standing, and she wasn't about to let the Zorak win. In the chaos of the invasion, Freya managed to make contact with the Resistance, a group of scientists, military personnel, and civilians who had banded together to fight back. They had heard her warnings, and they believed her now. Together, they began to devise a plan to take down the Zorak once and for all. The key to their plan lay in Freya's hybrid child. Despite her refusal to go through with the Zorak's original plan, the child had already been conceived. The Zorak had used their technology to accelerate the process, and now Freya's half-human, half-Zorak child was the most powerful being on Earth. The Zorak had intended to use the child as a weapon, but Freya had other ideas. The child, whom Freya had named Kyle, was unlike any other being. He possessed the strength and abilities of the Zorak, but he also had the heart and humanity of his mother. As he grew, Freya nurtured him, teaching him about the world and the importance of compassion. Kyle understood what the Zorak had planned for him, and he rejected it. He loved his mother and had no desire to see her world destroyed. As the Resistance prepared for their final stand against the Zorak, Freya and Kale led the charge. Kale's powers were beyond anything the Zorak had anticipated. With a single thought, he could disable their ships, turn their technology against them, and even manipulate time and space. The Zorak, who had once believed themselves invincible, were no match for the child they had created. In a final act of defiance, Kale confronted the Zorak leaders who had orchestrated the invasion. He destroyed their fleet, severing their connection to their home planet and ensuring that they could never return. In the aftermath, Freya and Kale stood victorious, the last remnants of the Zorak defeated. But victory came at a cost. The world was in ruins, and billions of lives had been lost. As Freya looked out over the shattered landscape, she knew that rebuilding would take time. But she also knew that humanity had been given a second chance. With Kale by her side, Freya took on the responsibility of leading Earth into a new era. The Zorak had intended to use Kale as a weapon, but now he would be a force for good, a protector of the world his mother had fought so hard to save. Together, they would rebuild, ensuring that the mistakes of the past were never repeated. And under Freya and Kale's guidance, Earth would rise from the ashes stronger than ever before.